casi frente a mí. Ella salió echándose algo así.
Almost across from me, she was throwing water on herself like this.
Did she remain there in the water, or did she leave?
¿Ella se quedó allá en el agua o se fue?
No, ella salió del agua y se tiró en la hierba.
No, she left the water and she threw herself down in the grass.
Then what did you see?
¿Y entonces qué vio usted?
No vi más de ella. Yo
I don't
solamente
see her
miré
anymore.
hasta ahí. Yo solamente miré dónde estaba la niña, a ver si veía a la niña.
That was it. I didn't see her anymore. Then I just looked over to where the girl was. I just looked to see if I could see the girl.
The vehicle that you first saw when they arrived, was that vehicle still there?
El vehículo que usted vio cuando primero llegaron ellos, ¿ese vehículo todavía estaba ahí?
Sí.
Yes.
Did you ever see the woman get back into that vehicle?
¿Usted en algún momento vio a la mujer volvió a subirse a ese vehículo?
No, porque yo no sé ni para dónde ella cogió.
No, I don't know because I don't know where she went.
No.
No.
Are you familiar with that area around the river?
¿Usted está familiarizada? ¿Usted conoce esa área cerca del río?
Sí.
Yes.
Do you typically see people swim in that water?
¿Usted típicamente...
Ms. Johnson, relevance objection.
I would just ask Judge if people typically are swimming in that water.
Overruled.
Assistant Interpreter, Your Honor, may I ask the question?
Yes.
¿Usted típicamente ve a las personas nadando en esa parte del río?
Nadando nunca.
Swimming, never.
Did you see anybody else around the woman and the child that day at the river?
¿Usted vio a alguna otra persona cerca de la mujer y el niño ese día en el río?
No.
No.
What did you do after you didn't see the child come out of the water?
¿Qué es lo que usted hizo después de que usted vio que la niña no salió del agua?
Yo llamé a mi hermana y entonces decidimos llamar al hijo del dueño de la casa, que fue el que llamó a la policía.
I called my sister, and then together we decided to call the son of the owner of the home, and that's the person that called the police.
When you said you called your sister, is this the sister that was cleaning the home with you?
Cuando usted dice que usted llamó a su hermana, ¿esta es la hermana que estaba limpiando la casa con usted?
Sí.
Yes.
And was she there in the home with you the entire time that you watched this happen?
Y ella estaba presente en el hogar todo este tiempo en lo que usted vio suceder.
Ella vio menos que yo porque ella estaba dentro. Yo la llamaba y volví. Pero la que me vio toda fui yo.
She saw less than I did because she was inside. Then I called her.
When you were watching all of this happen, did you tell her to come watch when you would see some things?
Mientras usted estaba mirando todo esto pasar, usted le dijo a ella que viniera cuando usted estaba viendo algunas ciertas cosas.
Sí, yo le decía, mira lo que está haciendo, va a entrar al río con el bebé.
Yes, I said, look what she's doing. She's going to go into the river with the baby.
Did the person that you called for help, did they call 911?
La persona a la cual usted llamó para una ayuda, ¿esa persona llamó al 911?
Sí.
Yes.
Did you speak to law enforcement at the scene, at that home or in that area?
¿Usted habló con los oficiales del orden público en la escena, o sea, en el hogar en esa área?
Sí.
Yes.
Did you tell them what you saw?
¿Usted les dijo a ellos lo que usted había visto?
Lo que acabo de decir aquí.
What I just said here.
Did they ask you if you could identify the person, the woman?
Ellos preguntaron a usted si usted pudo identificar a la persona, a la mujer.
Cuando me llegaron a verla, sí.
When they took me to see her, yes.
Did law enforcement take you to see her?
Los oficiales del orden público llevó a usted a ver a ella.
Sí.
Yes.
And did you recognize the woman they took you to see?
¿Y usted reconoció a la mujer a la cual ellos llevaron a usted a ver?
Sí.
Yes.
How did you recognize her?
¿Cómo es que usted la reconoció?
Por el pelo.
By her hair.
Y por el pantalón ajustado, pero yo lo vi cuando ella entró negro y ahí lo traía de otro color.
And by her pants, the ones she had on. But when she went in, I saw them as black. But then when I saw her later, they were a different color.
color were they when you saw her?
¿De qué color eran cuando usted la vio?
Cuando yo la vi, yo lo vi negro.
When I saw her, I saw them that they were black.
And when you saw her, when law enforcement took you to see her, what color were they?
Y cuando usted la vio, cuando los oficiales del orden público llevaron a usted a ver a ella, ¿de
Yo
qué
vi
color
ya
eran?
que era como de un color morado y andaba con un ajustador, no traía blusa.
Your Honor, may I ask for a clarification, please? This is interpreter.
Yes, ma'am.
Perdón, señora. ¿Usted eran de un color morado? ¿Y
Morado.
qué tenía arriba?
Los sostén ajustadores,
No tenía.
no, sí tenía negros.
When I saw them, they were of a more like a purplish color, and she had a bra on, black.
Cuando me la enseñó la policía,
When the police showed her to me.
Was that the same woman that you saw take the child into the water and leave without the child?
Esa es la misma mujer, la que usted vio llevar a la niña en el agua y salir sin la niña.
es ella.
It's her.
Do you know how much time passed from the time that you first heard the shout and saw the mother and the daughter to the time that the woman was walking away from the river?
¿Usted sabe cuánto tiempo pasó cuando usted primero vio, cuando usted primero escuchó el grito, entre el momento que usted vio a la
Yo
madre y la hija
calculo
saliendo
eso
del agua?
entre 20 o media hora, 20
I
minutos, media
calculate
hora, no más.
between 20 minutes and a half an hour, 20 minutes or half an hour, no more than that.
Your Honor, may I have a moment?
Yes.
Señoría, un momento, por favor. May I need an interpreter switch, please?
Yes.
No further questions for the witness, Judge.
All right. Just for purpose of the record, we're going to have a change in interpreters due to some prior commitments. Sir, will you please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm you swear or affirm you will accurately and truthfully translate from English to Spanish and Spanish to English?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name.
The interpreter's name is David.
Thank you. You're a certified state board interpreter?
Yes, I am.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Ms. Artigas. Now, you were working at a home in West Tampa.
Yo estaba trabajando en una casa en el oeste de Tampa. Yes.
Do you remember the address of that home that you work at?
¿Se acuerda la dirección de esa casa donde trabajaba?
No me acuerdo.
No,
Voy
I-
toda la semana, pero no me acuerdo porque no me la sé.
I don't remember. I go there every week, but I don't remember the address.
How long have you gone there every week?
¿Cuánto tiempo ha estado viviendo allí todas las semanas?
10 años.
10 years.
So for 10 years, you've gone there every week to that same house?
Y por 10 años ha ido a esa casa, a la misma casa. The same house.
Do you go once a week?
¿Va una vez a la semana?
No.
No.
Dos veces al mes. Dije mal, 2 veces al mes.
No, it's twice a month. I said it wrong before. Twice
Okay.
a month.
Do you go on the same day?
Va en el mismo día.
Sí.
Yes, on Thursday.
Okay, so you go every other Thursday to this house to clean.
Así que va cada otro jueves a la semana a limpiar.
Uno sí, uno no.
I go one yes and the next one I skip.
What time did you get there
Ahora,
when the day that the police were called?
el día de la feria.
Después de las 2:30 del día siguiente.
After 12:30 every day.
How long do you normally stay there?
¿Y cuánto tiempo se queda allí normalmente?
Hasta las 4.
Until 4 more or less.
When you went on that day, on August 2nd, you said that you were there with your sister?
Usted dijo que estaba allí con su hermana.
Sí.
Was
Yes.
anyone else with you cleaning?
¿Alguien más está allí con usted limpiando?
No.
No.
Were there any members of that household that were home while you were there?
Había algunas personas de la casa que estaban ahí presentes mientras que usted no estaba.
No, llegó una persona,
No, one person came,
pero se fue enseguida, llegó a recoger algo.
but they left right
No.
away. They came to get
No.
something and they left right away.
No,
So no.
Do you bring any children with you that you care for when you clean the home?
¿Usted lleva algunos niños con usted que usted cuida cuando va a limpiar la casa? No.
What is your sister's name?
¿Cuál es el nombre de su hermana?
Marbeli Valverde.
Marbeli
Valverde.
Bible.
Can you spell that?
¿Puede deletrearlo?
M-A-R-B-E-L-I-S. Marbelis.
E-S.
B corta.
It's small v.
A-L.
A
B corta.
L
Ba.
small v
A-L.
A
Valverde. U-E.
Malverde.
Malverde.
U-T.
When you were there on August 2nd, you said that you were on the porch cleaning?
Cuando usted estaba allí en agosto 2, dijo que estaba en el patio limpiando.
Yo no estaba en el patio, yo estaba en el portal, en el porche.
En total. Yes, I was in the porch cleaning.
Okay, is that,
Not in the patio, in the porch.
okay, so a front porch.
Es un portal al frente.
Al frente.
Yes, in front.
Is that a screened-in porch?
¿Y ese portal tiene malla puesta?
No.
No.
What is the first thing that drew your attention?
¿Cuál fue la primera cosa que llamó su atención?
Mi atención, el grito.
My attention, the scream.
Were there any words with the scream?
Hubieron algunas palabras con el grito.
No entendí nada.
No, I didn't understand anything.
When you heard the noise, the scream, what did you do?
Cuando usted oyó el ruido, el grito, ¿qué hizo usted?
Miré.
I looked.
Is that the first time that you saw any type of car?
Esa fue la primera vez que usted vio algún tipo de carro.
Ah, sí.
Yes.
Did you ever see this woman or the child inside of that car?
¿Usted vio a esa mujer o al niño dentro del carro?
No.
No.
Did you ever see them get out of the car?
¿Usted los vio a ellos salir del carro?
Ya ella estaba fuera del carro cuando ya yo sentí el grito.
She was already outside the car when I heard the shout.
Okay, so you didn't see them shut the door or get out of the car.
Entonces usted no vio a ella cerrar la puerta o salir del carro. No, I didn't see that.
Did you see either one of those two people ever go to the car after you first heard the shout?
¿Usted vio alguna de esas dos personas ir al carro después que vio el grito?
No.
No.
When you first saw this person after the shout, where was she?
Cuando usted vio a esa persona después del grito, ¿dónde estaba ella?
Iba en dirección al río.
She was on the way to the river.
Was this person facing you?
La persona estaba cara a usted.
No.
No.
What part of her body did you see?
¿Cuál parte del cuerpo de ella vio usted?
Yo la vi completa.
I saw the whole thing.
What part were you looking at of that person? Was it the person's back or side or front?
¿Cuál parte del cuerpo estaba mirando usted la persona? ¿Era
Me llamó
por la
la
espalda,
atención
por
que
el lado o por el
iba de
frente?
perfil, por el lado.
He was on the side, it caught my attention.
El pelo
The hair,
y el pantalón apretado fue lo que me
tight
llamó la
pants,
atención.
he noticed.
Was that person moving towards you or away from where you were?
La persona estaba moviéndose hacia usted o lejos, moviéndose más lejos de usted. She was moving away from him.
Did you ever try to get that person's attention?
Trató de conseguir la atención de esa persona.
Yo,
Me, no.
What was that person doing at that point?
¿Y qué estaba esa persona haciendo en ese momento?
iba en dirección al río.
They were on the way to the
Where was the child?
¿Dónde estaba el niño?
Lo llevaba de la mano, su mano izquierda.
She had it by the hand, by the left hand.
Now, the prosecutor that was asking you questions said it was a mother and daughter. Did you know these people?
El fiscal que le estaba haciendo la pregunta a usted dijo que era una mamá y una niña. ¿Usted conocía a esas personas?
No las conocía.
No, I did not know them.
Had you ever seen those people before?
¿Los había visto antes?
Nunca.
Never.
Did you know the relationship between those two individuals?
¿Sabía la relación entre esas dos personas?
No.
No.
Did either one of them, the child or the woman, have anything with them that you saw?
¿Alguno de los dos, la señora o la niña, tenían algún artículo con ellos que usted vio?
Ella me llamó la atención
It caught my attention.
una bolsa que llevaba a
Sí,
este
claro.
lado y se le cayó y ella la levantó.
She had a bag on this side, and it fell down, and she picked it up again.
When you say on this side, what side are you talking about?
Cuando dice en el lado, ¿qué lado está hablando?
Hablo del lado derecho porque yo estoy
Talking
acá,
about the
ella
right-hand
está allá.
side, because I was in the other side.
So the person had a bag on the right side, and where was the child? On which side?
Entonces la persona tenía una bolsa en el lado derecho, ¿y dónde estaba la niña? ¿En qué lado?
La llevaba a la izquierda, yo no veía, yo sabía que era un niño, pero no sabía que era niña. Digo niño en el sentido de niño.
It was on the left side, and I did not know that it was a girl, but I say a child on the left side.
Okay. And you knew it was a child just because of the size of the person?
Y sabía que era un niño, una niña por el tamaño de la persona.
Pero yo sabía que era un niño porque veía lo que caminaba. Pero un niño, cuando digo niño, me refiero a un sexo. Yo no sabía lo que era, hembra o varón.
I saw that it was a child because of what I could see when they walked. And I saw it was a child. I didn't know the sex, if it was a boy or a girl.
When this person was walking towards the river, did you ever see them go into the river?
Cuando estas personas estaban caminando hacia el río, ¿usted los vio a ellos entrar en el río?
No, yo no
No.
lo vi entrar al río.
I didn't see them go in the river.
No.
So you didn't see the child or the woman go into the river?
Entonces no vio a la niña o la mujer entrar al río.
No, porque yo seguía
No.
haciendo mi trabajo.
Because I kept on doing my work.
Did you ever go inside of the house, or were you always on the porch?
En algún momento entró a la casa o estaba siempre en el portal.
No, yo me quedé fuera.
No, I stayed outside.
When you were talking to your sister and getting her attention, did you go inside to talk to her?
Cuando estaba hablando con su hermana y para conseguir la atención de ella,
Yo abrí la
entró dentro de la
puerta.
casa
No, yo
para
abrí
ver
la
cómo-
puerta y dije, mira lo que está pasando.
No, I opened the door and said, look at what's happening.
When you said that to your sister, what was happening?
Cuando usted le dijo eso a su hermana, ¿qué estaba pasando?
Que la mujer, ya yo la vi ella echándose agua en el río. Ya yo veía a la mujer echándose agua en el río.
I was looking at the woman splashing water herself in the river.
When the woman was doing that, was she outside of the water splashing herself?
Cuando la señora, la mujer estaba haciendo eso, estaba fuera del río, pero echándose agua.
Estaba en el río, pero a la orilla.
She was in the river, but at the edge.
Okay. You testified a minute ago about the child being in the water.
Usted dio testimonio hace un momento de que la niña estaba en el agua.
Did you see that?
Yo no dije eso.
¿Dijo eso?
No, yo no dije eso.
No, I didn't say that.
No,
Okay. So you never saw this child in the water?
no.
Usted nunca vio la niña en el agua.
En ese momento no.
In that moment, no.
At any moment did you see that?
En algún momento vio la niña.
Cuando la mamá la llevó.
When the mother took her.
Okay, so tell me when that happened.
Dígame cuándo pasó eso.
Yo seguí, porque me extrañó, yo seguí mirando.
I kept looking.
Ajá.
It was
Y de
strange.
pronto ella abrazó, pero yo la vi con amor.
And then all of a sudden she hugged, but I saw it with love.
Y que fue entrando en el río. Y
She
el
kept
agua
walking
le
in
iba
the river,
corriendo.
and the water was covered.
Was there any kind of struggle between the child and the adult?
Usted vio algún tipo de lucha entre el niño y el adulto. No,
So you saw it as a loving hug.
usted lo vio como un abrazo amoroso.
Is that a yes?
Eso sí,
Sí.
yes.
When you saw the woman splashing herself with the water, was that before you saw her go into the water or after?
Cuando usted vio a la mujer que se estaba echando agua arriba, fue antes que ella entrara en el agua.
Yo la vi echándose agua antes, cuando ya entró al río, que estaba en la orilla, y cuando salía, estaba echando agua.
I saw her splashing herself on the edge of the river when she went in, and also when she came out, she was splashing herself.
You testified a minute ago about the woman going on the grass afterwards. What did you see?
Usted dio testimonio hace un momento de que la mujer fue a la hierba. ¿Qué
Cuando
fue lo que vio?
salió.
When she came out,
What does that mean? What did you see her do?
¿qué quiere decir? ¿Qué es lo que la vio a ella hacer?
Cuando ella salió del río,
When she came out of the river,
ella se tiró en la hierba. Se
Sí.
sacudió el agua y se tiró en la hierba.
she shook the water off and she got down on the grass.
What was she doing on the grass?
¿Qué estaba haciendo en la hierba?
Se tiró en la hierba.
She just threw herself on the grass.
What does that mean? Was she laying on the grass?
¿Qué quiere decir? Se acostó en la hierba.
Como se arrodilló.
She got on her knees.
And was she saying anything?
Ella estaba diciendo algo. No.
Did she appear to be upset?
Ella parecía que estaba enojada.
En realidad yo en eso no me fijé porque yo lo único que me preocupaba era la niña.
I really didn't notice because what worried me was the girl.
Did you hear this person, this woman, say anything at that point?
Usted escuchó a esta persona, la mujer, decir algo en ese momento.
No.
Nothing.
You ended up talking to your sister and then calling the son of the owner of the home?
Usted entonces habló con su hermana y llamó al hijo del dueño de la
Mi
casa.
hermana fue la primera.
My sister is the one who called.
Okay. And you said that the police ended up coming and talking to you later?
Y usted dice que la policía vino y habló con usted más tarde.
Enseguida
Right
le
away.
llegaron.
When you saw a woman who you identified, what did the police tell you about going to look at anyone?
Cuando usted vio a la mujer que la policía quisiera que identificara, ¿qué le dijeron que tenía que hacer?
No, nada más mirarla y decir la verdad.
Only to look at her and to say the truth.
Did they drive you anywhere to look at her, or did they bring her to you?
¿La llevaron a usted a algún lugar para que la mirara a ella o la trajeron a ella
No
a
me
usted?
llevaron a un lugar.
They took me to a place.
How did you get to the place?
¿Cómo llegó al lugar?
Con un carro de la policía.
In a police car.
In a police car that had lights, or was it a detective's car?
¿Era un carro de policía que tenía luces o era un carro de un detective?
De un detective.
A detective.
When you saw this woman that you identified, where was she?
Cuando usted vio a esta mujer que usted identificó, ¿dónde estaba ella?
En un carro.
In a car.
Did they take her out of the car for you to look at her?
La sacaron fuera del carro para que usted la mirara. Yes.
Was she handcuffed at that time?
Ella tenía esposas puestas en ese momento.
No me fijé.
I didn't notice.
Did you know if they had arrested her?
Usted sabe si la habían arrestado a ella.
Tiene que haber estado arrestada porque ya la tenía la policía.
They must have arrested her because she was with the police.
Was she wet?
Ella estaba mojada.
No creo porque ya había pasado, estaba sin luz.
I don't know because it had happened, she didn't have a blouse on.
Was she the only person that you were taken to look at?
Fue ella la única persona a quien le llevaron a mirar. Yes.
When you saw this person and the child, did you ever see that person's face?
Cuando usted vio a la persona y a la niña, en algún momento vio la cara de la persona.
Vi la cara de ella de lejos, yo no puedo decir su facción.
I saw her face from far. I cannot distinguish her features. It was far.
How much time did you have a chance to see her face?
¿Cuánto tiempo tuvo usted de mirar la cara de ella?
No sé, por cuando ella salió del río, yo la vi hasta que se tiró en la hierba. Ya yo no sé más nada de ella, porque yo miraba solamente buscando a la niña.
When she came out of the river and she threw herself down on the grass, that's the time that I had. Because I wasn't really looking at her, I was looking for the river.
So it was a short period of time?
Un tiempo corto.
El que ella estuvo en el río,
That she was in the river?
eso sí, rápido.
Yeah, it was fast.
No, a short time that you were able to see her face.
Un tiempo corto que usted pudo mirar su cara.
Sí.
Yes.
How far away was she
Okay.
from you at that time?
¿Qué distancia estaba usted de ella?
Yo no. O sea que está la casa, está el jardín, la calle,
There's a house there, the
la
garden,
calle, la
street.
distancia que hay desde la acera, la hierba calle hasta el río, y ella estaba unos
So
metros
just the
adentro.
distance from the
Ujú.
sidewalk to the grass to the river, and then she was a few meters beyond.
And you couldn't see a lot of the features of her face?
Entonces no podía distinguir mucho de las facciones.
De la facción, no.
No, of her features. No.
I don't have any. Was it raining that day?
¿Estaba lloviendo aquel día?
Sí, estaba lloviendo. la
Yes, it
lluvia
was
fue.
raining.
Now, was that a rain that was a small rain or a lot of rain where it was hard to see?
Era lluvia que era un poco de lluvia o era mucha lluvia
Era
que era
poca
difícil.
lluvia, era poca lluvia.
It was a little bit of rain.
Okay, and that was happening while you saw this woman by the river?
Y eso sucedió en lo que usted estaba mirando a la mujer que estaba en el río.
Is that a yes?
Digo que sí.
Sí,
Yes.
perdón.
I have no other question.
Ms. Johnson?
No, redirect, Judge.
Thank you very much, ma'am. You can step down.
Gracias, señora. Se puede sentar.
May she be released, Judge?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Johnson?
The state would next call Detective Kirkpatrick.
Sir, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm any information and testimony that you're going to provide today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir. You may have a seat. Please state and spell your full name for the record.
Sure. It's Matthew Kirkpatrick, spelled M-A-T-T-H-E-W, last name spelled K-I-R-K-P-A-T-R-I-C-K.
Ms. Johnson?
Detective, how are you currently employed?
With the City of Tampa Police Department.
And how long have you been employed with them?
Just under 10 years.
What's your current assignment and duties?
I'm a detective in the Major Crimes Bureau in the Homicide Unit.
And are your duties to investigate major crimes and or homicides?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you become involved in an investigation on August 2nd of 2018 that involved a Shaquilla Dennison, or someone who later became known to you as Shaquilla Dennison?
Yes, ma'am.
How did you become involved in that investigation?
I was called to the scene by Detective Sergeant Van Heist and advised there was a child found in the river, and I needed to respond. I was going to be the lead detective on the case.
And where did you initially respond to?
My initial response location was going to be West Eileen Street and North Rome Avenue.
And is that located within Hillsborough County, Florida?
Yes, ma'am.
What kind of investigation was underway at that point?
At that point, we were advised by witnesses that a subject was observed with a child in the river, and the river was searched. A child was located deceased. At that point, it was determined to be a homicide, and that's why I took the lead, or our unit took the lead on the investigation.
Approximately what time did you arrive in the area of Eileen Street and Rome Avenue?
Probably around 4:45 or so in the afternoon.
And when you initially arrived on scene, what did you do first?
I went and talked to Detective Sergeant Van Heist and Detective Gary Sandell.
And did you learn any information from them?
I did. They briefed me on what they had learned from responding officers and some of the detectives that responded as well.
Was there a crime scene identified at that point?
There was. It was a very large crime scene. It was taped off with crime scene tape. It stretched from just north of West Eileen Street in Rome, pretty far south, several hundred feet.
Can you describe that area?
The area is on the west side of Rome Avenue. There are houses. There's a two-lane street, which is Rome Avenue. To the east of Rome Avenue is a grassy area bordered by the Hillsborough River.
Are there any parks or parking lots located immediately in that area of the crime scene that was roped off?
No, it's just a two-lane street. Some people use Rome Avenue for parking for the houses on the west side of Rome, but there's no parking spots or parks that I'm aware of right there.
Did you learn of whether or not there were any witnesses that had observed anything prior to law enforcement being called?
Yes, I was advised there were several witnesses that had already responded to our area. Some have already done a show-up ID of a subject we had in custody, and I was tasked with finding those witnesses and discovering which witnesses needed to still do any kind of identifications.
Other than the investigation that was ongoing involving the drowning of a child, was there any other possibly related investigation ongoing at that same time?
There was. I was advised there was a auto theft case that occurred in our District 2 at around 40th Street and Hillsborough Avenue. I was advised it was a dark in color 2007 Nissan Altima that had been stolen by a black female accompanied with a small child.
What time was that incident reported?
I believe that incident was, dispatched at around 3:09 p.m.
And approximately how far, what is the distance between that location over on 40th Street and the crime scene over by Eileen and Rome?
I don't know the distance off the top of my head. I believe I looked up on Google Maps what the average drive time would be on a Thursday between 3 and 4 o'clock. It's stated through Google.
Overruled.
It stated on Google Maps it would take anywhere between 14 minutes and 34 minutes.
And had the vehicle been identified as far as the investigation that was ongoing with regards over on 40th Street?
It had been.
And what kind of vehicle was it?
It's a 2007 Nissan Altima.
And what had occurred at the 40th Street location?
According to witnesses, a black female escorted a child into the back seat of the Nissan Altima, entered into the driver's door, closed it, locked the doors, started the car, and was about to leave the auto repair shop where it was stored at. That same witness placed himself in front of the car to prevent it from leaving. The subject that took the car kept lurching the car forward every couple of feet or so to get the witness to move. Eventually, the witness, for his safety, decided to take a step away. At that point, the subject veered onto 40th Street, but not before running over the foot of the witness.
What was the name of that witness?
That witness's name was Abdel Razak, middle name M, last name Abdel Razak, the same as his first.
And were there any other witnesses from that location with regards to the black female and the child entering into the 2007 Nissan?
Yes, ma'am. There was another witness by the name of Anquan Hill.
Did he make any statements to law enforcement with regards to his observations?
He did.
And what did he state?
He stated he observed a black female with a small child on the premise of 5604 North 40th Street. The premise is Jordan's Auto Repair. He observed this black female push a child into the back seat of a 2007 Nissan Altima. Then he observed her get into the driver's door, close the door, and then drive off while the other witness, Mr. Abdel Razak, jumped in front of the vehicle trying to stop it.
Did either one of them state that they heard either the black female or the child make any sounds or make any statements?
Abdel Razak said he saw the subject inside the driver's seat on the cell phone make some statements.
And what were those statements?
He advised us that the person was saying, "Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you."
Can you describe the 2007 Nissan vehicle that had been reported stolen?
The one that was described as being stolen had no tag on it and no license plate. It had large green numbers on the front passenger side of the windshield as if it was for sale.
Did you, and I'm sorry, did you describe the color?
That's dark gray in color.
Did you later see that vehicle, or was that vehicle later identified in any particular location?
It was. Not just by the VIN. The VIN number was provided to the Tampa Police Department from the original scene, but at the scene at West Eileen, North Rome, Mr. Abdel Razak and Mr. Hill both identified the vehicle at that scene as the one that was taken from Jordan Auto Repair on 40th Street.
And was that located within the crime scene on Eileen and Rome?
Yes, ma'am.
Were Mr. Hill or Mr. Abdel Razak ever asked to make any identification of the woman that they saw get in and steal the vehicle?
Yes, ma'am.
Where was that done and how was that done?
That was done at the same location as Miss Artigas did her show-up identification. I would say it was nearly right in front of 2301 North Oregon. They were shown separately. I wasn't present for those show-up identifications for Mr. Hill and Mr. Abdel Razak. I was informed that they were positive identifications, though.
And as far as you were aware, being lead investigator, were the standard operating procedures followed with regards to those show-ups?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you later learn through your investigation whether or not any witnesses existed with regards to the child having been taken into the water by a woman?
Yes.
What witnesses did you learn had been identified?
I was told there were 2 witnesses that were identified and that they were sisters that were cleaning a house on North Rome Avenue.
And what were their names?
Miss Artigas and I believe Miss Valdever.
Did you speak with both of those witnesses?
I did.
Was there one sister that had offered more information to law enforcement or made more observations than the other?
Yes, ma'am.
And which sister was that?
Miss Artigas, through her statement, it appeared to me that she may have saw more of the scene or saw more of an event than Miss Valver did, because she was summoned by the sister to come look and was not paying attention at first.
And did they tell you the locations that they were when they were cleaning the house, as to whom was closer to the scene?
Yes.
And which sister was closer to the scene?
Miss Artigas.
What statements did Miss Valverde make to you?
Ms. Valverde stated that she was summoned by her sister to come look at this lady in the river. At that point, she walked over to, I believe, the window of the front of the house and saw what she thought was a woman in the river with a child.
Did she make any observations of the woman and the child before they got into the river?
I believe she may have said that they saw the child and the mother or child and the subject just outside of the water, maybe just on the bank near the water. Other than that, I don't believe she saw anything before that.
Did she make any statements as to how the child and mother got into the water?
No.
What did she tell you she observed after the child and mother were in the water?
She claimed that she saw the child floating away from the subject that brought the child into the water. The subject that brought the child into the water turned around and away from the child in the water, swam a few feet till it was shallow enough for that person to stand back up and then walk out of the water.
Did she provide you any more information?
She said she saw the child's hand coming out of the water. She was unsure of what she was seeing, but just described what she saw. That's just the child's hand and head kind of coming up and down out of the water.
Through your investigation, were you notified that a suspect had been detained?
I did.
And where was that suspect ultimately detained?
I was advised that the suspect was detained just in front of 2301 North Oregon Avenue.
And was that the same suspect that Mr. Hill and Mr. Abdel Razak made identification of?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you respond over to that location?
I did.
Approximately how far is that location on Oregon Avenue from the crime scene on Eileen and Rome?
Just a little over half a mile.
Do you know approximately what time the suspect, had been detained?
I believe our dispatch noted it as 4:14 p.m.
Was there any description given or any information with regards to what she was doing when she was first stopped by law enforcement?
Yes, Officer Worst and I believe Corporal Gentry both described the subject they had detained as singing a song.
What song was that she was singing?
I guess kind of a nursery rhyme. It's raining, it's pouring, the old man is snoring.
Was Miss Ortigas or Miss Valverdette ever asked to make an identification of the suspect that was detained on Oregon?
Yes, ma'am.
Were either one of them able to make an identification?
Miss Ortigas made an identification, positive identification.
Were you present for that?
I was nearby, maybe 40 or 50 feet away from the subject we had detained.
Are Miss Ortigas and Miss Valverdette both Spanish-speaking?
Yes.
Do you speak Spanish?
No.
Were there law enforcement officers assisting you in translating?
Yes, ma'am.
Was there a Spanish-speaking officer with Miss Ortigas during the show-up?
Yes.
How was that show-up done with Miss Ortigas?
I advised the Detective Santana, who was the Spanish-speaking detective assisting us, that to give me a heads up whenever they were a few minutes away so I could clear any officers away from the vehicle and around from the person that we had in custody, so that it wouldn't be a crowd of officers around the subject. She did. I made sure we moved 40, 50 feet away from her, and that was when Detective Santana arrived. The subject that we had detained was removed from the back of a vehicle, and Ms. Ortigas observed the subject for, I would approximate maybe 30 seconds. After that point, I spoke with Detective Santana, advised me that it was a positive identification from Ms. Ortigas.
Did she say how positive Ms. Ortigas was with regards to that identification?
I don't recall what she said at that point. Later on, in another interview I conducted with Ms. Ortigas, I asked her specifically how sure she was, and she said she's 100% without a doubt.
What time, was the suspect handcuffed at the time of the show-up?
Yes, ma'am.
And what time was the identification made by Ms. Ortigas?
I want to say around 5:20 p.m.
So that was approximately less than 2 hours after the crime had initially occurred?
Which one? The auto
I'm sorry,
theft?
the
Yeah.
the crime of the child drowning in the Hillsborough River.
Yes, ma'am. Going into that a little deeper, there was a photo taken by another individual.
Sustain.
Through your investigation, were you able to ascertain a time frame as to when the woman and the child were in the water?
Yes.
How were you able to do that?
Another witness was located that took a picture of a subject in the water, and that timestamp of that photo was around 3:35 p.m.
Do you see the suspect that was detained on Oregon Avenue here in
Yes.
court today?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you please point to her and describe an article of clothing that she's wearing?
The black young female wearing a red jumpsuit.
Please let the record reflect he has identified the defendant.
Record will reflect.
Was the child that had been observed initially by Miss Artigas being carried out into the water by the woman, was she ever located?
The child located?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Where was the child located?
According to the diver, the child was located 5 feet under the water, approximately 50 to 75 feet away from where the witnesses initially saw the subject and the child going into the water.
Through your investigation, did you learn the name of that child?
I did.
And what's the name of that child?
Jahira Daniels.
Were life-saving measures attempted on the child after she was retrieved from the river?
Absolutely.
Was she transported anywhere by medical personnel?
To St. Joseph's Hospital.
And what happened at the hospital?
She was declared dead
Do you know approximately what time that was done at?
about 4:49 p.m.
Through your investigation, did the Tampa Police Department ever make any contact with any family members of Shakayla Denson or Jahira Daniels?
Yes, I believe contact was made with Jaderick Daniels and I believe Miss Wilcox.
Who is Jaderick Daniels?
We were advised that Jaderick Daniels was the paternal father of Jahira.
And who is Miss Wilcox?
Miss Wilcox, we understood as the mother of Shakayla Denson.
Did she give any information or description about Jahira Daniels? Her age?
She was able to provide pictures and the age of about 4 years old.
Did she give any information with regard to any issues that Jahira Daniels had?
I believe she stated that Jahira was autistic and nonverbal.
With regards to Shakayla Denson, did Miss Wilcox ever state or tell you that Miss Denson suffered from any mental illness?
No mental illness.
Did you ever meet with or speak with Shakayla Denson?
Yes.
And the suspect that was on Oregon Street, the person you identified in court, is that Shakayla Denson?
Yes.
Where did you meet with her?
I met with her originally on the scene. I didn't say anything to her there. But the second time I met with her would be at the headquarters of the Tampa Police Department.
And where specifically at headquarters did you meet with her?
In the homicide area on the 8th floor.
Did you speak with Miss Denson?
I did.
Can you please describe that interaction?
She was brought into the interview room, introduced myself to her. She made a few statements, and eventually I began to read her Miranda.
What statements did she make prior to you reading her Miranda?
Statements that she made to me were that her family was out to get her. She also stated that the maintenance man at her apartment complex was maybe in her apartment and put a spell on her apartment.
Did you ask her any questions to elicit those responses from her?
No, ma'am.
Were you in the interview room alone, or was anybody assisting you with the interview?
I entered the interview room alone. Detective Sandell entered into the room just maybe a minute or two after I did.
Prior to starting your formal interview with Ms. Denson, did you go through her Miranda warnings?
Prior to?
I'm sorry, prior to starting your formal interview with her?
Yes.
Did you begin to go through the Miranda warnings with her?
Yes, I did.
And how is it that you did that? Did you use a form, or was it from memory or a card?
I used the TPT 310 form.
And did you have any concerns initially after she made those statements to you? Or did you take any precautions when doing the Miranda warnings based upon those statements she made to you?
I did.
What precautions did you take when you were reading the Miranda warnings?
In this situation, and maybe in others where I might suspect someone talking kind of the same way, I will make sure that they clearly understand their warnings or their rights. I read from the form verbatim, and after each sentence I would make sure I not just only get a physical understanding, but actual a spoken understanding. Ask them if they understand what I'm reading to them. I want to make sure that there's nothing misunderstood or not understood by them. So I would read a sentence, look at them, and ask them if they understand what I'm saying, if they understand that right.
Do you have a form with you today that you could read from and read it exactly how you did on that date when you interviewed Ms. Denson?
I do. Okay. So our TPD 310 form says in parentheses 5/13.
How did you begin reading those rights to her?
I would start off asking her or telling her, you have the right to remain silent. I would look at her and I would ask, do you understand what that means? And wait for a response from her.
What was her response after you read that first sentence?
She said she understood. The next sentence I read is, if you give up the right to remain silent, anything you say can be used against you in court. I asked her if she understood that. She said she did. The next sentence I asked her is, you have the right to consult with an attorney before you make a statement or answer any question, and the right to have an attorney present during questioning. I asked her if she understood that. She said she would like someone here. I asked her, who would you like here? And then she proceeded to say she had a lot of questions and wants to know what's going on. I proceeded to tell her, I really need to know what you mean by you want someone here. Again, she said she just has a lot of questions and wants to know what's going on and thinks I have some answers for her. I explained I may have some answers for her, but I need to understand what she means by you would like someone here. I decided to go ahead and reread that same sentence. So again, I asked her, you have the right to consult with an attorney before you make a statement or answer any question, and the right to have an attorney present during questioning. I asked her if she understood what that meant. She said, I would like someone here. And then I blatantly asked her, are you asking for a lawyer? She didn't answer that question. She just said, I want to know what's kind of going on. I want to know what you know. I have a lot of questions. At that point, I asked her, do you want a lawyer? And again, she did not answer that question. She just said, I have a lot of questions. I want to know what's going on. At that point, I decided to end the interview. I don't feel like she was either in her right mind to make that statement or make a statement to us at that time, and I didn't want to proceed any further.
Was there an autopsy conducted of Jahira Daniels?
Yes, ma'am.
And who is the medical examiner that performed that autopsy?
Dr. Krastowski.
And did he make any initial findings or determinations with regards to manner or cause of death?
Dr. Krastowski had the manner of death as homicide and the cause of death as drowning.
Judge, may I have a moment?
Yes.
And Detective Kirkpatrick, is the person that you identified as Shaquilla Denson here in court the same person that Ms. Artigas identified as the person she observed walk into the water with the child and leave the child in the water?
Yes, ma'am.
No further questions, Judge.
Ms. Stradley, sorry.
Detective Kirkpatrick, you said that you got called out to the scene by Sergeant Van Heist at that time, and you
Yes,
are
ma'am.
currently a detective with the homicide unit.
Yes, ma'am.
How long have you been with that unit?
Since January of this year.
When you went out to the scene, it was on West Eileen Street.
West Eileen and Rome, just about at the intersection there.
And when you went at that time, was the vehicle still out at that location?
The Nissan Altima, yes, ma'am.
You ended up conducting some of the investigation yourself and then relying on what other officers had learned prior to your involvement, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And then you all divide up duties and different detectives take different tasks.
Yes, ma'am.
As far as the determination about it being a homicide, you said that determination was made quickly at the scene.
I would say there was a time it was called in. The description given by the caller was that a subject threw a baby into the water. That was around, I think, 4 o'clock when we received the first call. By the time I got there, 45 minutes had passed. So once the baby was recovered, before I got there, it was determined by those, I guess, Sergeant Van Heist and maybe people above him that this was going to be considered a homicide, and the initial investigation would be handled by the homicide unit.
And you're the lead detective on this case?
I am the lead detective.
Did you all ever determine who the person was that said that a child was thrown into the water?
I believe the caller was Ernest Carrera. He is the individual that was called by Miss Artigas or Miss Valdevut.
Okay, so that's not even a person that had firsthand information?
It would be secondhand, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so there was no eyewitness to a baby being thrown into the water. That was misinformation.
There was an eyewitness to it. The caller that called was not the eyewitness.
Did the eyewitness tell somebody that the child was thrown into the water?
I believe I'd have to check the call notes to see what exactly was said. I don't want to speculate if there was a mistranslation. Mr. Carrera called and spoke English. I don't know if there was something said in Spanish that got mistranslated or what. I don't want to speculate, but I could possibly look at the CAD call and tell you what was specifically said.
But as far as your understanding as a lead detective in this case, the origin of that information would have been the witness that just testified earlier?
Yes.
Okay. Not from anyone else?
No, ma'am.
When you went out to the crime scene and later on a show-up identification was done with several witnesses in this case, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was in relation to the grand theft investigation as well as the homicide investigation.
Yes.
The show-up itself, did you take a part of that?
I took a part in coordinating Mrs. Artigas' show-up identification. The show-up identifications of Mr. Abdelrazak and Mr. Hill I was not present for, nor was I aware until after the fact.
As far as coordinating, did you transport anyone to the show-up identification?
No, ma'am.
Did you talk to them about what they were going to do?
No, ma'am.
So as far as following the SOP regarding show up, you wouldn't be able to give direct testimony about that because you weren't part of actually showing the individual to her or talking to her about it.
That would be correct. I wasn't in the car, when this was going down, no.
What is the SOP for Tampa Police Department on a show up?
I don't recall off the top of my head, but the subject, the witness, would be driven to the area of the detainee. It's my belief that we would not have a large presence of officers around the detainee. One officer should escort the individual outside of the vehicle or wherever he might be detained, he or she might be detained. A witness would be given a certain amount of time to view. Every detective does things differently. It may be a little more thorough, might not be as thorough as we might like sometimes. But again, I wasn't in the car with these individuals, so I don't know what they did. I'd have to rely on their supplements and their statements in court.
Who made the decision to conduct show-up identifications versus a photographic lineup in this case?
I made a decision that I wanted to go ahead and go with that. It was discussed beforehand.
Why make that decision in this case to do a show-up? What were the factors that you were taking into consideration in doing it in that way?
Well, we had a subject detained very close to the crime scene. We had witnesses that had just possibly seen the individual that was in the water with the victim. So it was kind of my decision to go ahead and go with the show-up.
And you knew that these witnesses that you were having to go and do a show-up identification, that Ms. Denson was not known to them?
I didn't ask.
You didn't ask them if they knew the person?
No.
Would that be something that would have been important to take into consideration in how you're making an identification?
Possibly.
But you don't have that information?
No, ma'am. Only person I didn't even really speak to anybody because Ms. Artigas speaks Spanish.
Okay. When you got information from Officer Wurst and Officer Gentry, you said, were the ones that had contact with Ms. Denson?
Yes, ma'am.
And you said that they indicated to you that Ms. Denson was singing a song, a nursery rhyme, at the time that they made contact with her.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you find that unusual?
Yes.
Okay, something you'd take into consideration as far as your contact with this person later on and possibly interviewing them?
Absolutely, I would note it.
Anything else told to you about her demeanor or behavior at the time of her arrest?
Demeanor, behavior, no.
And when you ended up speaking to Ms. Denson, you said that that was at TPD headquarters in the homicide floor, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you all have a room where you conduct interviews regularly?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that room a room where you can video record and audio record if necessary?
Absolutely.
In this case, your contact with Ms. Denson, was that recorded in any fashion?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it audio recorded?
Audio and video.
Okay, so all of your contact, including these statements that you're saying she made before you read her Miranda, are captured on audio and video?
Yes, ma'am.
When you started talking to her, you said that she was talking in a way that you wanted to make sure that it was clear that she understood her Miranda warnings.
Yes, ma'am.
And what was it about what she said to you made you concerned or make you want to go another step to see if she could understand her warnings?
I would say maybe her demeanor and the things that she said would lead me to believe that she maybe not be thinking clearly.
And you said that even though you started to advise her of her Miranda rights, she kept saying that she had questions, and you thought she was not in her right mind to make a statement. That's what your testimony just was, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was based on her demeanor and the things she was saying to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Were you advised at any time while you were there speaking to Ms. Denson, or that Ms. Denson was there at TPD, that any members of the Public Defender's Office had gone down to TPD to attempt to make contact with Ms. Denson?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you afford Ms. Denson at any time the knowledge that there were attorneys there that wanted to speak to her or give her an opportunity to consult with an attorney?
Members from the Public Defender's Office, no, I did not let her know.
Okay. Did you ever go down and make contact with any of the lawyers that were there from the Public Defender's Office in the lobby?
No, ma'am, I was too busy.
Okay. Was that a conversation that you all had at all as far as the detectives and the sergeant in the homicide unit
What conversation?
about the members of the Public Defender's Office being present and attempting to make contact with Ms. Denson?
It was discussed.
And what was the discussion about how to handle that?
I'm going to object to relevance, Judge.
Ma'am? Mr. Evans?
Well, the relevance is that when she went to talk to the detective, that the detective said that she had questions at that time, and if she was afforded the right to ask somebody any questions, it's just a thought process and how that determination was made and her right to counsel at that point.
Judge and I would just, he didn't take any statement from her. He didn't go on with the interview based upon her invocation.
Objection sustained.
When did you make contact with Jaderick Daniels?
I didn't contact Jaderick Daniels in person. It was maybe the next day, maybe on Friday, the 3rd. I think called him on the phone.
And what about Miss Wilcox? When did you make contact with Miss Wilcox, Miss Denson's mother?
I believe that was on Monday the 6th.
Okay, so that would have been after Miss Denson was already arrested.
Yes.
I have no further questions at this time.
Ms. Johnson?
Maybe a moment. Detective Kirkpatrick, at any time when Ms. Denson invoked her right or said she would like that or like counsel present, did she identify an attorney that represented her in any way or someone that she wanted you to call?
No.
And were you aware of the Public Defender's Office ever being appointed with regards to this investigation at that time?
No, I was under the opinion they needed to be appointed.
No further questions, Judge.
Witness excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Johnson, additional witnesses?
No further witnesses from the state judge.
Mr. Adler?
I have no witnesses at this time, Your Honor.
Proceed to argument.
Yes, Your Honor. Based upon 907.041, the state must prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that pretrial detention is necessary. There are certain factors that the court is to consider when making that determination. First, the court must decide whether or not a dangerous crime has been committed by the suspect, whether or not there's a substantial probability that the defendant committed that crime, that dangerous crime. The factual circumstances of that crime indicated show a disregard for the safety of the community, and lastly, that there are no conditions of release reasonably sufficient to protect the community from the risk of physical harm to persons. So the state would argue that based upon the witnesses that testified before Your Honor, Ms. Ortigas and Detective Kirkpatrick, that the state has proven to the court that the defendant has committed not one but two dangerous crimes, first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse. The state would also argue that based upon the eyewitnesses' testimony as well as Detective Kirkpatrick, that the positive identification that was made, the specific observations made by Ms. Ortigas, that the defendant is the one who there's a substantial probability that Ms. Denson is in fact the person that committed that crime. Specifically based upon the initial observations that Ms. Ortigas made of Ms. Denson initially prior to her getting in the water with the child, still observing her when she got in the water, observed her as she got out of the water, and then less than 2 hours after making these observations, she makes a positive identification of Ms. Denson. lastly, Judge, the factors with regards to there being a disregard to the safety of the community and the conditions, there's no other conditions of release that would be reasonably sufficient to protect the community. I would argue those together. The state would argue that in and of themselves, the two crimes in which the state's proven to you that Ms. Denson there's a substantial probability that she committed those crimes. The first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse show she is a danger to the community. Then when you look at the specific facts surrounding this case and this investigation, she took her 4-year-old innocent and helpless, autistic and nonverbal child into this body of water and let her drown and exited that water and left her there. The state has concerns that based upon the charges that we have proven to you that she committed, as well as the observations and the testimony of the witnesses, that she's a danger to the community, and there are no other conditions that could be placed upon her to protect the community. So we would be asking that you grant the motion for pretrial detention.
Mr. Adler?
Your Honor, in terms of what the state has to prove on 907.041, the testimony has to, or the findings of evidence have to be solely based on the hearing today, cannot be based exclusively on hearsay evidence. Now, we have in this case not just a drowning, but alleged homicide, Your Honor. There has not been any testimony about any type of intent or abuse in regards to the drowning in this case. The testimony from Ms. Artiga is that a woman was with her child, holding her hand, holding her in an embrace and going into the water, that when she came out of the water, she threw herself onto the grass. There's been no statements of any abuse or any intent by Ms. Denson to harm her child in any way. There's no testimony that this couldn't have been anything other than an accidental drowning. There's been no testimony about a homicide. Even if the court finds that the state has proven enough evidence as far as the homicide charge goes, there's been no indication that there's no other ability for a release. Ms. Denson has a very minimal prior history. I believe the only thing she has prior to this is a petty theft. She has numerous family members, including the father of the child, Jaderick Daniels, who is present today, her mother, Ms. Wilcox, her father, Mr. Denson, and several members who support her and love her and are here to be able to help her if she's released. And in fact, you have a lot of testimony from statements that have been made by potential witnesses, nursery rhymes being sung at the time of her arrest, and indications from the lead detective in this case that Ms. Denson at the time of her arrest and her time of her interrogation may not have been in her right mind. I believe all those things are for the court to consider in granting her a bond and denying the state's motion for pretrial detention.
Judge, if I may, just
Brief
briefly, I
response.
wanted to inform the court, she does have a petty theft in her history, which was in 2016. She has 4 traffic offenses that range from 2010 to 2017, and 3 misdemeanor juvenile priors. But also to consider, Judge, is the fact that she stole a vehicle to assist her in facilitating this crime. We have a witness who saw that the mother first had the child by the hand and then ultimately was having to carry her, and when the woman was in the water was up to her shoulders. She was having to hold the child. She lets the child go, and the child comes up and goes down 2 to 3 different times as the mother is walking away from this happening.
Anything else?
Nothing further, Judge.
No, Your Honor.
With respect to the motion for pretrial detention that was brought pursuant to 907.041, I'm going to grant the motion. I'm going to find that there's a substantial probability in granting the motion under 907.041, subsection 4, subsection C5. I'm going to find that there are at least 2 dangerous crimes for which the defendant has been charged. There's a substantial probability based on the evidence and testimony that's been provided today, not solely based on hearsay, that the defendant committed such crimes and that the factual circumstances indicate a disregard for the safety of the community, taking into account specifically the facts of the crimes, the alleged crimes, as well as the circumstances under which the defendant and the child ended up at the river, including the stealing of a car and potentially injuring or running over the foot, according to the testimony of one of the witnesses who made a positive identification of the defendant. And I'm going to further find that there aren't any other conditions that can protect the community from the risk of physical harm. These are based on the defendant's past and present patterns of behavior. Anything else?
Nothing further from the state.
All right, thank you very much.